Thank you for tuning in to another episode of my Veterans to Success podcast. You probably know by now, my mission is to help 1 million veterans and entrepreneur business owners achieve the dreams, goals, and aspirations they deserve. That is why I created the Veterans to Success podcast, because I get to interview guys, men and women, who want to share their fascinating stories with you about their time before, during and after their time in the military, so you can benefit and overcome your challenges. So sit back, relax, and get ready to be mesmerized, astounded, and entertained. Thank you for joining me today. How are you doing?
Joe, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on here, and great to see you again. It's always a treat.
Yeah, thank you. And I was on your podcast, and your podcast is brilliant. And we're gonna be revealing that, as I say, because there's no big build-up, there's no big introduction, other than to say you're a fantastic bloke. And as we move along, you'll be sharing your story, won't you?
Yes, that's the plan.
Right. Okay, so let's dive straight in, because I've got 2 of these and 1 of these, 2 ears, 1 mouth. I want to be listening to you and really paying attention. So tell me about your life before the military.
Yes. So I was born in a place called Fort Sill, Oklahoma, because my dad, he was in the Army, and he served as a military policeman. Somewhere before that place, he had met a woman in Thailand while he was stationed there. Turns out she'd be my mother. And so I was born, Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Grew up, had a new home pretty much every 2 to 3 years, and got to live in places like Germany, Japan, visited places like Korea, South Korea, that is. And I don't know why I had to clarify that. Nobody's really allowed in North Korea. Not an ideal vacation spot. But South Korea, and then also Thailand, and then lived in various spots all throughout the United States. Some of them pretty cool, like Presidio and the Monterey Peninsula of California, but also some places you never would have heard of, like Herlong, California. And if you can find that on the map, congratulations. Well, I guess it's easier now with Google Maps, but back when I was growing up there, you'd be like, her what? Where? How many cookies did you say? And then another place called Fort Hunter Liggett. And neat fun fact, there's a movie out there called Clear and Present Danger, stars Harrison Ford, and there's a scene where they're qualifying or selecting a sniper for this special mission, and that scene takes place in Fort Hunter Liggett. So if you're wondering, does it look like that in real life? The answer is yes, but a lot more vegetation. So it's very sparse. The reason why it's a training area is there's nothing out there. In fact, it was so sparse, there was not even a housing area at Fort Hunter Liggett. It was a trailer park outside the gate, and the next nearest town was something like 30 miles away, a place called King City. All random stuff, but all that to say, lived all over the place, some cities, some small, really podunk places, and some really remote places. All that just really ingrained in me, the Army culture. So when my dad gave me the advice of, do whatever you want in life, Jerry, just don't ever join the Army, I was like, yeah, you got that, Dad. We did not know that 8 years later, I was going to disobey that piece of advice.
Right. Well, listen, you're not getting off that easily, mate, because you just reel that off, right? Like it's not much. First of all, your dad's military police, right?
Yes.
So how did that work out with the discipline regime, sort of?
Oh, man. Funny enough, my dad, he was the good cop. So whenever they did interrogations, everybody else played bad cop, and he'd come in and be good cop and get full on confessions from everybody. And all it took was a couple of cupcakes from Hostess, the Hostess, like the same guys who make Twinkies. So he'd be that guy. He'd come in with the stereotypical donuts, like, hey, you look tired. I know they're grilling you, have a donut. And by the way, so he was that kind of guy. He was that kind of guy at home. However, when your mom's from Thailand, we had more than enough discipline in our house.
All right. So your mom was a strict one.
Yes, she was the stereotypical tiger mom. So, being Asian, there's a lot of pressure, and all the Asian Americans here will now like nod up and down as they're listening to this. There was a high expectation that I not only got perfect scores on my homework assignments, quizzes, and tests, it had to be the highest perfect score, and there's no such thing as that. But that's the expectation. So if
Mm.
everybody gets 100, somehow you got to pull off 101. If there's extra credit, you got to get more than everybody else did. If your highest score is this is a true story. I once got a 97 on a quiz. The next highest score, this is like third grade, so this is some deeply held memories here. It was like second, third grade. I scored a 97% on a quiz, and it was something like dividing by four. That's all it was. So math facts, how do you divide by four? The next highest score was like a 76, 77, somewhere in that ballpark. So I was the only A, there were no B's, and everybody else got C or below. And the teacher wrote this wonderful note on the quiz because I think she knew what I was dealing with. I wrote this wonderful note on the quiz about how I got the highest score out of the whole class. I took that home, and my dad's excited. He's like, "Wow, that kid's smarter than I ever was." Whereas my mom was like, "Where were the other 3 points? This
Right.
this is you slacking off. Get back to it." Because it was the
And
first time I went from 100 to 97.
yeah, and how did that feel at the time?
Oh, I hated it because it and somebody pointed this out to me on a show I was on a couple years back where inadvertently my mom, she didn't do this because she hated me or
No.
that I was never good enough. She did this because this was her best way of preparing me to be successful in life. So, and I understand that now at 48 years old. I hadn't actually understood that about 2.5 decades ago. But at that time though, when you're 7, 8 years old,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hard to think that your love is the result of performance. So,
Yeah.
like my mom loves me when I get a perfect score. She's happy. She'll celebrate. Anything less than that, she's not happy. She sends me to my room. Therefore, she didn't love me. I didn't perform enough.
Yeah.
And that took time to really work out. It probably would have been a lot faster if I realized counseling or therapy would have helped with that. But, yeah, you
Yeah, and
don't join the
that,
army.
yeah, and that's a tough gig on the basis that what shapes you a lot in
Yes.
life is what happens at age 7 or before. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a tough gig. And of course, I mean, you're the pad's brat, as we respectfully say, when you're a pad in the army or Navy or Air Force, where you're living, but you're only there for a relatively short time. It's
Yeah.
certainly in child years, like you're there for 1, 2, maybe 3 years at most. Then you move again, and you're doing
Yes.
that systematically. And your dad was in the military for 20 years, and so how did that at the time, right? Because I know you view it differently, which we'll come on to a little bit later. At the time, how did you view that? You move in, you're effectively putting your backpack on, going as a family, going to a new place, having to make friends again.
Yes. Scary in terms of because by the time it's time to move, you've now figured out the neighborhood. You know where the best places are, where the best playgrounds are, how to get in and out of the post and not get caught. You made friends. You've become part of the community. You know where the youth center is, where the video games are played. This is
Yeah,
back in the 1980s when you had to bring quarters to play video games. So by the time you've gotten settled and you got your life going, that's when dad or mom gets the orders that it's time to move somewhere else. And it's
yeah,
usually a place you've never heard of. So it's like, I remember being in Herlong, California, the great metropolis of, no, it's in the middle of nowhere, guys.
yeah,
It's like so out there. It's like an hour and a half to 2 hours away from Reno, Nevada, which is also in the middle of nowhere. But I remember when my dad got orders to go to Japan, and I knew nothing about Japan other than that they spoke Japanese there. I didn't speak Japanese. So what does this mean? Do I have to learn Japanese? I don't even know my mom's native language of Thai. And how am I going to pull this off? Do I have to learn chopsticks? I don't know how to eat with chopsticks. What are chopsticks? And so that was the freak out of a 7 year old. I mean, it was mostly internal. I did share it with my teacher. My teacher said, "Hey, they have American kids over there. They all live in communities just like this one. You'll be fine. You'll be able to see the world, but also come back to what you're familiar with." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So I had a teacher, kind of calm me down a bit. And then we
right.
get, and sure enough, yeah, we're living on a military post with Americans, some American parents, American culture, American kids. And then right next to our housing area is a wall with some barbed wire. And then you can see through the wall because there's like little pockets where there's just the way they would rotate the center blocks every so many. And
Yeah.
and so on Saturday, while the American kids are playing outside, the Japanese kids are coming home from school, and we would just talk to each other because they would learn English in school, so they would practice on us, and then we would exchange toys through the wall. It was really cool, a lot of fun. And then when you got to be 10 years old, you could go off post without your parent,
Right.
as long as somebody was 14 and would go with you. There were some rules there. So really, when one of the fellow Boy Scouts in my troop, well, I was a Cub Scout, he was a Boy Scout. When he turned 14, we had him take all of us everywhere. We're like, Pete.
And and it was like herding cats then.
Yes.
The
Oh yeah.
poor guys,
I still remember
14 in
seeing,
charge of 10-year-olds.
yes, Pete Conroy. If you're out there and you hear this somehow, thank you, because I didn't have to follow my mom through the boring markets. We got to go straight to the snack shops, and that's all that mattered as a 10-year-old kid. So thank you for that, guy. So that was like living in Japan, and then once you get settled there, now it's like, all right, now you're moving back to California. I'm like, where? Fort Ord. You're like, where's that? And now you get back to the States, and people are different. It's like, wow, and these are Americans, and they're different, and they're not like the Americans in Japan for the last 3 years. Um, and then we started to really get exposed to civilian culture, and it turns out there's like a military culture and a civilian culture, and that was just mind blowing to me. Like, how do they not stand in the movie theater at the opening when they play the Star Spangled Banner? That's
Right.
not a
Yeah.
thing. And they're like, no, are you weird? We don't do that. I'm like, every movie theater I've gone to as a kid up till what I was like 11 or 12 years old played the national anthem when you started a movie. Well, turns out that's only a military thing. Um, and then we go back to Germany. And this is around the time my parents divorced, and again, starting all over again. Still living in a pocket of American kids, but they're different from the kids in Japan, different from the kids in California, and gosh, then you're back to California.
And
So
and how did that go? How did that go when your parents divorced? What was going on and how did you feel?
yeah, that
Because
was
you had a brother then, didn't you?
yes, I still have him. He's still around.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you're hearing this, yeah, love you, bro. Um, so yeah, when my parents split, again, my mom was very strict. My dad had orders to go to Germany, but for some reason, the army didn't put us on the orders.
Right,
So his only option was he had to go to Germany no matter what. And then while he's over there, he has to get the orders amended, get housing, and bring us over as fast as possible. And it looks like, from what I understand from, mostly from my dad's side, because he knows the trail of the orders, he got the orders changed pretty quickly, but the mail back in 1986, 1987 did not get those orders to my mom in time,
right,
or at least in a timely manner. So my dad got the orders changed. He secured housing, but in that time, we're just talking like a month and a half, 2 months. Um, somebody come in and convinced my mom that my dad was in Germany cheating on her, and so she should also cheat on him
right,
and get free from him and live the life she's always wanted to live. Like that guy played into all her insecurities. She fell for it. And then for my brother and I, very different reactions. So my mom, this is before my dad comes to get us, and my mom tells us, "Hey, my brother and I are gonna, you, Jerry, your brother, you're gonna go to Germany with your dad. I'm gonna stay here. I'm going to get my GED finally, and then I'll probably meet up with you later on." Which that part was a lie. She never intended to actually meet back up with us because she was going to leave. I'm happy because, wow, I'm not going to be under my mom's thumb anymore. I'm going to have freedom. We're going to be living in a bachelor pad. This is going to be great. I'm going to I'm going to feel what it's like to play with my friends every single day, not just on Saturday. I'm looking forward to this. My mom is mean, but my brother, though, he's crying because um, this is he's never had the same kind of you got to perform for affection kind of thing. He's always been loved on, and
right,
this is the first time my mom is kind of casting him aside. So he's broken up. Turns out he knows why she's really leaving, because he woke up at a time when she was coming back with the boyfriend. So he knew there was another guy, and he's 2 years younger than me. So I'm 11, he's 9 years old,
right,
and so my dad comes in a few days after this, maybe a week after this, and he's on fire. Like, he's not mad on fire. He's like man with a purpose to
mm,
save his marriage on fire. And he's done everything to have conversations with my mom, to make amends. What have I done wrong? How can I be a better husband? And this is a gentle giant. Remember, I said he's good cop.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
if you're mad at my dad, there's something wrong with you, not my dad. Like, that's how
Yeah,
nice of
yeah,
a guy he is. You might be mad because he's a little too nice and he didn't just put his foot down when he should have. But other than that, there's no reason to really be mad at my dad for anything.
yeah.
So he's trying to work things out with my mom. But also at the same time, in the military, in the army at least, this is a big no-no, especially if you're a chief warrant officer. You don't go and mess with the family of an enlisted soldier. And that's exactly what this guy did. He was a chief warrant officer. He made a bet with some other chief warrant officers, and he broke up the marriage of an enlisted man. And so he's
Right.
having an active affair. So my dad initially confronts that guy and says, "Hey, knock it off in this now," and the guy's like, "Or what?" Well, I'm a military policeman, so I can't do anything to you. However, I can report you to your chain of command, and we got so many witnesses, and so he reports it. The guy basically gets a slap on the hand, like, "Hey, knock it off, stop blanking the guy's wife," kind of thing. Um, but all that, just all that effort, my mom still stays. My dad now has taken us to Germany without my mom, and and over there, that's when my dad, he's just at a loss. He doesn't know what to do. He's already on antidepressants. He's already depressed. A lot of his value was built on this ability to have a family,
Yeah,
and that didn't work out. So, and then it turns out there's a lot of things that were said between them, where my mom really shattered a lot of what he thought was real, and
yeah,
so it drove him to suicidal tendencies and actions. And so at 9 years old and 11 years old, my brother and I, and my little brother and I, are now doing suicide prevention to prevent my dad from carrying out the thing he's trying to carry out. And at the same time, we don't want to be sent to my mom. So my mom
yeah,
cannot find out this is happening. And on top of that, that means my dad can't get the help he really needs. So we can't even report this to his boss, because then they got else, then we got to figure out, what do we do with the kids? Well,
yeah,
they have a mom, go send them over there. And so we couldn't have that happen either. Because our thought, at least my thought, was, if we go to where my mom is, she's got her boyfriend and he's just going to throw us out, because that's kind of what happened to us.
yeah,
So we can't go there. That's not a viable option. We know how stepdads are. We assumed they were going to get married. They never did. She eventually caught him in other similar arrangements, and threw him out. Um, yeah, a couple months go by. My dad, he eventually did something to himself that he couldn't hide from his boss.
right.
Um, and he wound up getting the help he needed. His boss went into action right away, understood the situation, that in no way should the kids be sent to the mom, because the mom clearly is not living a responsible way right now. And there
Yeah,
was
yeah,
there was a lot of documentation to prove it, not just from what my dad was saying, but they just had to reach out to this guy's unit
yeah,
and confirm that, yeah, there are filed complaints against this officer about this particular woman. And so it was proven, like, yeah, there's some stuff going on. It's not safe to send these two boys to her. So we wound up in foster care for about 2 months. My dad got
yeah,
the care he needed in Germany, and then they transferred him to Walter Reed. He finished out his care. During that time, we were sent to my aunt and uncle's house in Fort Dix, New Jersey. So we lived with them, my aunt Bill, I mean, my uncle Bill, my aunt JJ. My aunt JJ is my mom's oldest sister,
right.
and so yeah, everything started to get pieced back together, and then we moved to California, and that's where my dad could be closer to his family. And then we started to find out that, like, all the uncles, it felt like, were getting divorced, all but at least one. So out of five uncles, four of them were going through divorce, all of them taking it out any way they could. Just none of them learned how to handle their emotions, or
Mm,
it just, they didn't know what to do. So they're all depressed. They're all getting drugged up now, and the kids, all my cousins, are now, we're kind of like Lord of the Flies. We're raising ourselves,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
total chaos. So every weekend we're at my grandparents' house, but it's Lord of the Flies. We're the adults are all going out to party and kind of drown their sorrows on a Friday, and my dad's just hanging out with them because he needs to be around family. And so my cousins and I are just mostly picking on me. I somehow became the brunt of a lot of the bullying inside of our family, and a lot of it turns out later on, people start to admit to me that the reason why they were so angry at my brother and I, but more so at me, was that seeing my brother and I, because we didn't fit. I mean, everybody in my family is blonde hair, blue eyed, and then you got these two short Asian dudes who got brown hair, brown eyes, and tan
Yeah.
skin. So we stood out, and so already, whenever they saw my brother and I, they thought about my mom, and they thought about the pain that my mom put my dad through, and again, not knowing how to handle their own stuff, uh, they would take it out on my brother and I. But my brother started to play along and kind of, do what he had to do to not get picked on as much. Whereas me, I was like, these guys are stupid. Like, I don't care if you're my cousins or not. And so I wound up like saying things back to them, fighting back. And so every time I fought back, it got worse for me. And so that went on from 11 years old to about 14. My dad finally caught on and said, you never have to go back there if you don't want to. So from 14 to about 18, so my high school years, I probably went to my grandparents' house 2 or 3 times.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
and that was mostly after I was able to drive, and my brother wanted to come up just to show off I could drive, that kind of thing. But I could also leave whenever I wanted to. When everybody was starting to become a pain in the butt, it was like, hey, Jimmy, my brother, I'm going home 2 hours back to Monterey. You want to come with me, or are you going to stay here? And he's like, I want to go with you. It's like, road trip, brothers, let's go. And so, yeah, I had more freedom. But yeah, it was just a handful of times I went to my grandparents after all that when I was 14.
Right. So really, that was a period where you and your brother were stuck between a rock and a hard place, really.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And to have your father with suicidal tendencies and being in a position where you don't want to say anything because you don't want to go back to your mum, and actually you found out that later that his superior just understood straight away and got your dad the care. So I suppose what comes through on that is just ask for help when you need it.
Yes.
I think that's really important. And so you may have been a short Asian guy or from the East, but you were a tough little mother, weren't you? Because
Oh, yeah.
you just thought, yeah, I'm not having this. I'm going to show you. So I think that, and that comes through in the military a lot of time, because the guys think, oh, roughy, toughy soldier. And when I say guys, that's women as well. And sometimes they just don't ask for help when they need it. So that's what's coming through to me. Ask for help. Right.
Yeah.
So then you had I was going to say an attack of stupidity. I don't know where that come from, because you wanted to join the military, because it comes to you like in a flash, doesn't it? And you think, it's not exactly the shiny sunlight down through the clouds, but there's something that triggers it, isn't there?
Yes. And then there comes that point when you realize I can't just walk off of this job. Like, I am committed legally for, well, in my case, 4 years, and 4 more after that if we count the individual ready reserve. So yeah, anyway, so I go through college. I got recruited to be a tuba performance major at the last second. I'm like, there's no way I could save the world or save anybody's lives as a tuba player. So I switched gears and became a pre-medical student, because my mom had always told me, get good grades, go to medical school, become a doctor, and then become an officer in the Army, because that was her narrow world of what success looked like for an American. Was you were an officer in the Army, and then from her culture, you're a doctor. And she put the two together. He's going to be both. He's going to be a doctor and an officer in the U.S. Army. That's going to be success times 2. And I'm like, she really needed to get out more and look at like what rich people did, because it was way more than just being a doctor. So yeah, pre-med student, got out barely with a 2.1 grade point average. So in terms of getting into medical school, that was just not going to happen. And plus I had no medical experience, and I had not even taken the MCAT, the what do you call that? The screening exam to see how well you do in medical school. And then I did a practice test, and I'm like, oh wow, did I learn anything? And it's like, well, no, Jerry, you got a 2.1 GPA. Of course not. So I was looking at my options, like, well, I need to at least graduate, because I was just a semester away, and I just scraped together whatever money I could, whatever loans and grants I could pull together just to get that one semester done. But then it was like, okay, great. I bought one more semester. I got to get this done because I need something to show for the last 4.5 years. What do I do after that? And I still thought I was going to be a doctor, so I started looking at my options. Some advisors from different medical schools and Stanford was one of them. Shared with me that they looked at a whole person approach, or they took a whole person approach when they selected their students. So they didn't just look at your grade point average or your MCAT score. They looked at those plus your life story. Were you involved in school with extracurricular activities? Did you do anything that demonstrated leadership capability? Did you get medical experience? Like, do you have workplace experience in the field of healthcare? And on top of that, what additional certifications do you have that the typical person doesn't have? So the recommendation to me was become a nurse or a nurse assistant or a medic or paramedic. Any of those things will do, and get about 3 to 4 years of experience in the workforce. And if you can take on any type of projects where you're the lead, that'll also look good. And then try again in about 4 years. I was like, all right, I could do that. Except I was broke. I put everything I had into that last semester, and I had nothing left other than I'm going to live with my dad and do the one thing I said I would not, which is live at home like all my other cousins under mom and dad's roof, or just dad or just mom, depending on where they landed. So there's that. I was tired of being in class anyway. So would I really do well going back to paramedic, a paramedic course or a nursing program? The answer was no. Like, I was already tired of school. I had no money to pay for tuition anyway, and I wanted to travel. And so all those were starting to come together, and I realized military. And the military has medical personnel in it. They train you, and that's the way to go. And so I went to a recruiter's office for the Army, because I even had a thought process behind this. I didn't share this with you, but I thought Navy corpsman at first, but then I realized I have this big fear of being eaten alive by sharks. And I didn't want to be put in any kind of environment where there's going to be an ocean, because they might put me in the ocean and then I get eaten by a shark. And so that was not going to happen.
That's sort of a vivid picture of
Yes.
why you shouldn't do it.
Yeah. And this should also hopefully boost recruitment for the Army, because the other option was the U.S. Air Force. I knew of the 4 branches, because we don't really count the Coast Guard. Sorry, guys. And Space Force, you're too new. But
have you ever wondered what is going to happen to all your knowledge, wisdom, and skills when you die? Yeah, me too. That is exactly the reason why I created JoeTeam.com, so I can leave a legacy for my children and for other successful people who are just like you. For less than 40 pence per day, you get access to valuable business and life resources gained from my over 37 years in business and 15 years in the military. These world-class resources are designed to help you achieve the goals, dreams, and aspirations you deserve. So visit joelteams.com now to find out more. That's JOETEAMS.com, joelteams.com to find out more.
Air Force, we already know among the 4 branches, they have the best perks. They have the highest amount of training that they do. They're probably the most civilian out of the 4 branches. We often refer to them as a corporation, not a branch of the military. But again, same vivid freak out of, but they're in planes, and those planes crash, and they don't crash from like 5 feet up. They crash from thousands of feet up. I don't want to go like that. So not the Air Force. Plus they got the blue uniforms. Who looks tough in blue? Except the Marines, whatever. And then
so that's interesting, because you have the same view that we do as well, and it's about taking the mick out of each other, isn't it? Because we're all in it together. Yeah.
Yes. And then they're the Marines. I'll say that it's because they also got on the same boats as the Navy, but it was also, I saw their physical fitness requirements, and I didn't like to run, and they have the toughest running requirement out of all 4 branches. I'm like, nope, I'm not doing that one.
Well, thank you for your honesty.
Plus they didn't have medical staff. They were all in the Navy anyway. So that ruled them out too for that. So that left the Army. And so I went to an Army recruiter, told them what I was up for, what I wanted. And they tried to get me in as an infantryman. They almost did, because the job code for infantry at that time was 11 X-ray, which is sort of the entry level infantryman before they split you off for light or heavy infantry or, special weapons, that kind of thing. And so they almost got me there, but I caught on because they admitted, no, that's infantry. It's not radiology. I'm like, but you said X-ray. They're like, that's the letter X. Sorry. I'm like, oh, we'll teach you that in basic training. Don't worry. I'm like, okay. What else do you have? And they were like, well, you could be a tank mechanic. I'm like, is somebody going to drop something on their foot and I get to treat that? We can't guarantee that in your contract either. Okay. What else do we have? You could be a linguist. You can learn Arabic, but you got to sign up for 6 years. I'm like, would I be in a hospital? No. Okay, I can't do that. Okay, what about Apache helicopter mechanic? I'm like, same question. No. And then finally they're like, look, do you want to take one of these jobs or not? And I was like, well, I already shared with you what I'm looking for. And if you have it, great. If not, then I'm sure the Navy or the Air Force, because now I knew what I had because I scored a perfect score on the screening exam, the ASVAB. And my general technical score was also much higher than what they needed as a minimum for anything. And you don't want to let those guys walk out the door. So I knew that much.
Yeah.
That's about the extent of my negotiation capabilities at the time, though. I just said, hey, I'm looking for some medical experience so I can eventually become a doctor. So that's really what I'm looking for. Anything else is expendable. And this is after they gave me the ultimatum. Like, do you want a job in the Army or not? Take one of these, or we're gonna have to send you home. And I was like, okay, well, I guess you have to send me home. And here's why. And then the guy like put the phone to his ear and said, okay, medical specialist, and we can send you tonight. And I was like, I still have one semester of school left. You can leave in June. I was like, there was not enough time to hear something on the phone. So that's how I knew it was fake. But I still fell for it. And I'm like, okay, what about that loan repayment thing for my college loans? Well, you gave that up because you went for these jobs instead of these jobs. Okay, I'll accept that. And that's how I signed up. I joined the U.S. Army as a combat medic. That's probably part of why I did only one enlistment instead of more. And I found myself going to Fort Sill, Oklahoma in June. So this whole thing went down in like late December, early January. Now in June, I'm going off to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for basic training, which is also where I was born. So every time we filled out paperwork and we had to fill out that line that said birthplace and I wrote Fort Sill, Oklahoma, people thought I made a mistake and I would get punished for writing down the wrong thing on the form and not paying attention. And I had to explain so many times while doing push-ups, I was born here. This is my birthplace.
Oh, yes. So those lovely things, push-ups. And it's good to see you didn't get sucked in by the infantry either. So well done.
But I could do as many push-ups as they could, thanks to being born at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and going to basic training there. But yeah, I got through there. They exposed me to my first leadership role as a platoon guide. So in our platoon of 64 trainees, my job was to make sure that they all woke up in the morning, after the drill sergeants came through, that we showed up on time for chow, for PT, all those things. Like I was basically the babysitter when the drill sergeants weren't around. And I got fired from that role about 3 times, but they still kept coming back to me. And part of the getting fired was so that they could rotate other people through and get that experience. But they kept putting me in that role. I graduate from basic training. I go on to my medic training. And my goal is just to lay low. No leadership roles, just get trained to be a medic, go on to the Army and be a medic. Day one, they pull me aside. We're getting briefed by the class, the lead instructor, but another instructor pulls me aside, tells me and my battle buddy to go to the back of the room. I think I'm in trouble. My battle buddy's like, I thought you were going to lay low. What happened here, man? I'm like, I'm sorry, man. He went to basic training with me in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. We're now in Texas going through medic training. And they asked me a few questions. And in the end, they say, we're going to make you the class sergeant. What is that? Well, it's kind of like platoon guide, except you have these soldiers. There's about 44 of them all together. And your job is to make sure they all graduate and that they show up to class. And when they don't show up to class, you got to know where they are, make sure they get fed, all those things. And I'm like, okay, great. And that was it. Day one, I tried not to get picked. They found me, they picked me, pulled me to the back, said I was now in charge. And so I made sure. I was like, man, I'm not going to not pass because somebody in my class didn't pass. I got the nickname the Warden. Apparently I was too strict, so strict that the instructors thought it was funny to call me the Warden. we go on to our field training exercise at the end of the cycle. And I got a challenge to fight almost twice a day, every day for the first 2 to 3 days. And somebody finally pulled me aside, one of the drill sergeants from another platoon, and he said, "Hey, Dugan, I recognize, or I noticed, I hope you don't mind me prying, but I noticed you get challenged to a lot of fights out here." I said, "Yes, I do, drill sergeant." "Why do you think that is?" "Well, I demand a lot out of them, drill sergeant." He laughed. He said, "Well, because you came in at a higher rank than everybody else as a specialist instead of a private, you're going to be asked to do a lot of leadership type of things like this. And if you want to do well and not get killed by your own guys, treat them with respect. Treat them like people. Like, yes, you have a higher rank than they do. Yes, you're in a leadership role that they're not in, but they're people. And there's not a whole lot that separates them from taking the rank off of their own shoulders and the insignia off their uniform and kicking the living crap out of you." I was like, that is really good advice. And he said, you can only fight so many people before you get tired. And so you'll go a lot further if you just treat people like people and treat the rank and the position as just that. That's your responsibility. Here's your true responsibility is to treat people like people. I was like, what?
And what difference did that make? Because one of the things we talk about as well is mentorship and coaching.
Yes.
So, I mean, what sort of impact did that have on your behavior, your thought processes, and just the way you acted generally towards others when communicating and communicating with yourself?
That was the game changer right there, because I put it into practice immediately. We'd already been told that the next day I was going to be separated from my class, and they were going to split off into squads. So it'd be up to the squad leaders to handle the day. And it was my job to make sure that the squad leaders were prepared. So I went to the squad leaders almost immediately. I briefed them up, asked them if there was anything they needed from me. They're like, "No, we got this. We've kind of had this the whole time. We're just waiting for you to let go." I'm like, "Really? All right, well, I can't be there. So good luck, guys. And you got this." That's all I can say to you, because I won't be there to help. But if there's anything I could do before that, let me know. If there's anything I could do after, let me know. And then that was it. We went to bed, woke up the next day. They went out, they did their things. And I was hearing reports all throughout the day of like how great these guys are doing. And they're like, "What group is that?" "Oh, that's Dugan's group." "And what about these guys?" "Well, that's also Dugan's group." "What about these guys?" "That's Dugan's group." So these guys were like away from me, doing their thing, being led by the squad leader, not by me, by the squad leader. And they're just killing it. They're doing such a great job out there. And then it's coming back like somehow I was responsible for this. And I'm like, I was not responsible for any of that. And that was just mind blowing to me. I'm like, how am I getting credit for their work? They're doing great. And then sure enough, we're getting accolades. I'm like, hey, I can't take any credit. That was these guys right here. And they're all smiling. They're like, what? And then they're shocked too. Like, what? This guy is telling us that we did it ourselves? And I'm like, because it's true. I mean, we can't lie about that. I was in that tent 2 miles away from you the whole time. I wasn't allowed to do anything. You guys really killed this. This was awesome. And even the report back, like we were the only unit out of the 4 units there that gave a perfect report back because we knew what everybody was up to. And that same drill sergeant pulled me aside. He was like, "Hey, how was today compared to yesterday and the day before?" I'm like, "Drill sergeant, that was the easiest day of leadership I've ever had in the short time I've been in the Army, but really ever." And he's like, "How many people wanted to fight you?" "0. What did you have to do to make sure they got their jobs done?" "Nothing. I went to 3 guys. They got the job done." And then they came back, told me what they did. And I just reported that to that guy. And he's like, that's leadership. You equipped them the night before, let them go do their thing. You empowered them. You treated them all with respect. And I noticed that when they were giving you all the credit, you immediately were giving the credit to everybody else. It's like, yeah, because I didn't do anything. They did, because that's leadership. You make sure that you're funneling the recognition to where it needs to go. You're providing the support where it needs to be. And a lot of people get it the other way around, and that's why they don't do well.
Yeah.
Like,
And it's about setting the parameters as well to give them
yes,
where they've got to focus on, what they've got to do, and what the outcome is, what the mission. And I suppose that's where I see in civilian life big problem. I mean, I'm not saying the military's perfect, because we get
got a lot of bad
as
leaders
well.
there too.
But I mean, in civilian, in civilian street, I see that there's a lot of managing going on. You know,
Yes.
the people who are supposed to manage our leaders, they get in the nitty-gritty when they should just leave it, so long as the team's qualified.
Yeah.
And even if they're not, sometimes it's best just to let them go, so long as no lives are at risk. Let them go and let them learn.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And that's the biggest thing I carried into civilian life from the military life was just build your people up. Make sure they got the training they needed. Make sure they have the communication, the information they needed to make decisions. And then ultimately that they have all the information they will need to be able to make decisions without you there. Um, for certain parameters of what they can and can't make decisions on. And it's done a number of things for me. Like in Operation Iraqi Freedom, I was able to lead a team of 5 other medics, and the closest one to me during the combat operations was maybe 15 miles away. And then the next closest pair of medics was about 30, 40 miles away. And then there was one pair of medics over 150 miles away from me, because we left them on Najaf while the rest of us went to Baghdad. And so they were with a battery and taking care of people. So all that to say, whenever something needed to be decided on, they couldn't just call to me, because to do that, they'd have to go through the unit they're supporting to get on the radio to call me. And then I have to get on the radio, and we're now tying up 2 different radio networks just to say, yes, you could put bandages on the guy. Or yes,
and you could be compromising your position as well. So,
yes. Yeah. So these guys who were not a sergeant, they were like E1, actually E3, E4 was the levels of pay grade they were in. They had to be able to make decisions as an E5 and E6, and also communicate with E6s, E7s, and E8s, as well as officers, to say, hey, we got to stop what we're doing, or we got to get a vehicle to take this guy over to the aid station over here, or we need to resupply, or we need to set up an evacuation site here for a helicopter to come in. They had to be able to make those decisions very soundly, confidently, competently, and do it tactfully, because now they would be instructing people way above their pay grade to do what they said. And that required a whole lot of skill, a whole lot of trust, and a whole lot of confidence building between them and the units they supported. And so they had to see that we were not traditional as the medics in the unit. We were very non-traditional, and you couldn't treat the medics the same way you treated everybody else, because their role was different. And so it paid off. They all did a great job. And yeah, I carried that over into civilian life, and it was just like, I gotta trust you to make these calls. And people are like, no, you make the calls. You're the director. I'm like, yeah, I direct. I'm directing you to make the call. From now on, based on these parameters, you can make decisions up to this cost if it has this benefit, and just tell me what you did. Like I would tell somebody that, and they're like, no one's ever done that with us before. I'm like, well, they should have. And they're like, why are you doing this? Like, well, you want to get promoted someday, right? And they're like, yeah. So in a way, you got to see the world the way I see it, but better, or from your perspective. But there are things I think about that you don't always think about. And by allowing you to make decisions, you start to exercise those muscles, so that when you do take over a role like this one, you're already prepared, and you just slide right in, and you have a better success rate as a new leader than your typical new leader. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, but what about your job? What about job security? I'm like, the number one way for me to get promoted is to be replaceable. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, like if I am indispensable and I can't be replaced in my role, they're never going to move me up, because I have to be where I am. But if all of you can take my job at any moment, I can move up, or I can move laterally, or I can go to another organization, and this organization here will still succeed. And they're like, this is so weird that you're talking like this. I'm like, on top of that, they're like, yeah. I'm like, I want to go to Disney World with my wife and not be called by my boss every day. So the only way to do that is to make sure you guys make decisions without me, and that everybody has confidence in you when I'm not around. I get to take a 2-week vacation. And then when it's your turn to take vacation, it's the same thing. We got systems set up, and then you're not being bothered. And then when you become a leader and you lead the same way, you could take vacation as a leader. So all these other leaders who don't bother taking vacation because they'll just be working the whole time anyway, you won't be like them. You'll actually take a break.
And that's about empowerment, isn't it?
Yes, huge.
So Iraqi freedom was an interesting time. And so I suppose every now and again you had some opportunist, maybe firing at you. Then you moved into the peacekeeping role. And that was interesting as well because, right, you trained as combatants. And then all of a sudden you're told, right, go and make the peace, guys, win hearts and minds. And you haven't got a clue, have you?
No, we don't. And so when I was in Kosovo, the first part of my career, there was a lot of train up to be a peacekeeper. We had mock up sites, mock up villages, and we brought people in from Macedonia who spoke Albanian as well as Serbian languages, and they knew the culture, so they reenacted what it would be like to interact with villagers. We did missions that were based off of real world activities in Kosovo. We did checkpoints and the things that we searched for and prepared for. We had smart books. We understood what we were getting into. Plus, every platoon had an interpreter, so our leadership could always talk to the locals. When we went into Iraq, it was a completely different game. We trained up on new systems, and we practiced the invasion itself. We practiced driving in different formations in the desert. We practiced, shooting with new computer systems. We had new radar to see when people were shooting artillery at us, so we could do counter battery fire very quickly. And our rules of engagement were very different from what I heard in Kosovo. In Kosovo, there were all these like escalation rules, and there were a lot of steps you went to before you actually fired a shot. In Iraq, our rules of engagement before we crossed the border and invaded was if you see them wearing a uniform and they got a weapon and you feel threatened, shoot them. If you see them in a uniform, maybe not a weapon, but you feel threatened, shoot them. If you see them with a weapon, but not in uniform and you feel threatened, shoot them. If they just look at you funny and you feel threatened and you think your life is in danger, but you don't quite see a weapon, but it's clear they're menacing, go ahead and shoot them. If they're in uniform and they're in a foxhole and they're sleeping, their back is to you, you can shoot them. If they're in uniform, they got a weapon, but they're brushing their teeth, you can shoot them. And so it was like a long list of examples. And the only exception was if you see them with a weapon, you see them in uniform, but they threw down the weapon, they're taking off their uniform and they're running away from you, they've chosen not to be a combatant anymore. You cannot shoot them unless you feel threatened. But seriously, it's gonna be hard to prove when they're running away from you and doing that clearly that they were a threat. And they're like, oh, by the way, we don't shoot warning shots. We only shoot to kill. We don't shoot to wound. We only shoot to kill. And that was like the gravity of the whole thing. Like, we're like, oh, yeah, this is funny. This is funny. This is funny. Ha, ha, ha. And at the end, they're like, we only shoot to kill. And you're like, oh, this just got real. And, you're all trained. We test fired our weapons so many times before we crossed the border. And then we crossed over and we were 3rd Brigade of 3rd Infantry Division. The Iraqis apparently knew who we were because instead of sand-colored camouflage, we had forest green because I guess the other 2 brigades felt they needed it more to have sand-colored camouflage. So even our patches of the 3rd Infantry Division on the sides of our helmets were forest green on top of sand-colored camouflage helmet covers, whereas everybody else.
So you were walking around like trees.
All us, and we figured, even with the camouflage, you could see us from 40 miles away. The camouflage really isn't going to do us any good anyway. That was kind of our rationale, like to console ourselves. But because of those green patches, whereas the rest of 3rd Infantry Division had those sand-colored subdued patches, the Iraqis knew us as the Green Patch Brigade. And we're about 3,500 soldiers armed to the teeth. And they were told specifically, engage the enemy, especially behind their lines, to attack their supply lines, and at all costs, or by any means necessary, avoid contact with the Green Patch Brigade. And that was our brigade of 3,500. And the reason for that was the 3rd Brigade, the Green Patch Brigade, was there doing training exercises from, I believe, August till December or September, something like that. They'd already done a 6-month deployment in Kuwait, and they trained and trained and trained. Came back to the States in September. October, had a warning order, prepare to go to Kuwait in January. And so after 3 months of rest, that brigade was now back in Kuwait. I was now with them because I was on rear detachment the first time. So now what do we do from January to March? We train up some more. And it's like, we trained how to invade. Well, now we're training even more with new stuff. And our final instructions before we crossed the border was the only way home is through Baghdad. So we'll see you there. And we're like, all right, cool, let's do this. And that was just a big motivator. It's like, yeah, we'd rather not have to do anything to these guys, but the only way home is to get to Baghdad. And that's the mission. So let's do what we got to do and get there. And we were just very methodical. And we got from the border to on Najaf within 3 days. Actually, less than that. It was like 24 hours or so.
Yeah, that's a quick move. That
yeah. Open desert. We just popped up, secured the airfield, left a detachment there, and then we popped out and went with the rest of 3rd Infantry Division and went to Asamwa on Najaf. Nasiriyah, Samwa on Najaf. Chilled out because we ran out of bullets, and there was a sandstorm. So that was day 7, I think. Maybe day 3. Day 3.
Right.
Sandstorm lasted 3 or 4 days. So day 7, we were regrouping, refitting. Took 2 weeks to get our supplies to catch up, and then we pushed on to Baghdad. That took just a matter of days, like 3 days, and we were toppling Baghdad. And so people are impressed, like, man, you guys toppled a country in 21 days. And those of us who got the briefing and paid attention were like, we were supposed to be done in 7. like that was kind of our, like, we were kicking ourselves, like, like, oh wow, you guys did it in 21 days. We're like, we're supposed to do it in 7. But that was the plan anyway. And so it took us 3 times longer. But yeah, it was just so surreal. At any given moment, you'd hear the reports that there was a suicide bomber that took out a checkpoint of ours, or the Fedayeen were doing, pockets of resistance. Keep your eyes peeled. We've heard reports of RPG teams trying to sneak up on us. All kinds of stuff like that. And fortunately, as we got closer to Baghdad, a special forces team joined us, and I didn't get to interact with them, but I'd see them in passing, and apparently they shared a lot of information that helped us do our thing. Our military intelligence guys who were piggybacking with us shared information with them. And I still remember that we were like in between 2 levees. So we're on a single file road, 2 levees, a canal on the outside of those levees. So we're pretty much trapped on this road. I'm like, oh, this sucks. They make movies out of stuff like this. And we knew that there were pockets of 2 and 3 people on the left. And so we were just staying vigilant, keeping an eye there. Then somebody realized that there were foxholes dug in all along the right bank on the other side of the canal. And we realized, oh, there might be people in those. And these 12 guys from the Special Forces unit, I never got to hear them or talk to them, but we got this call over the radio net. Hey, be advised, do not engage on the right-hand side, no matter what you see. Just keep your heads down. That is a special group. They're going to be clearing the right side of the bank. And you're like, okay. And then as soon as they said that, boom, flare goes off. You hear lots of machine gun fire. You hear some explosions. You hear what sounds like an AK-47 returning fire, and then silence. You're like, oh, shoot. And that happened all night for hours. They started at the front of our column, and then for miles, they just went right up the canal bank and took out every foxhole all the way down. And we didn't know the extent of what they did until the next morning when we finally pulled out of that road and onto some farmland. We got to pass a good number of those foxholes that they cleared for us. And it was just like, I'm glad they're on our side. That sucks. And then it was very sobering for us because the military intelligence guys who were linguists also. So they spoke Arabic. They were listening to Iraqi military transmissions from right before the war started through the end of the operations. And some of the information they had relayed up was that there was I think battalion of mechanized infantry trying to push their way into us because they know that there's artillery plus some rear supply guys. And if they can strike that, it's going to take out a considerable amount of firepower. So they pass that information on because they've been tracking these communications since day 1. They were able to give coordinates based on triangulation. They coordinated with other military intelligence teams that were intercepting these radio calls. And I'm only sharing this because I'm sure the technology to do this has already been upgraded like 7 or 8 times in the last 20 years. How they did it then is like the ancient way now compared to what's being done now. And so they were able to triangulate the transmissions. And artillery was able to take them out. And so now, as we're occupying these open fields to have a true proper perimeter, we're driving by BMPs that are smoking still, and the intel guys see the identification on the vehicles, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's Colonel so and so," and we're like, "You know these guys by name?" They're like, "Yeah, we've been listening to them since before we invaded."
Right.
That guy was married and had 2 kids, and we're like, "Oh." Like
And
it
that
was just
brings it home real then, doesn't it?
yes, yeah, like we're fighting people.
Yeah, yeah,
No
yeah.
different than us. And who got to hear that more than anybody else were these guys from military intelligence, who were linguists, who'd been listening to their conversations before we invaded, and up until that night before, they overheard not just commands and instructions and what their plans are. They heard like the more personal stuff too, like, "Hey, what are you
Yeah.
gonna do when this is over?" And, "Tell us about your kids." And, like, the
Yeah.
officers would talk to each other like people and just be personal, and these military intel guys got to hear that, and,
Mm.
they said that, yeah, they were hearing traffic, got the coordinates of where these guys were, and then all of a sudden they didn't hear traffic anymore, but they were hoping to see some prisoners instead
Yeah.
of just smoking, hulls of armored vehicles, and it was just like, "Oh, man," that's sobering. And,
Mm.
even
Yeah.
getting into Baghdad, we start running into civilians and they're asking questions like, "Have you seen my son? Have you seen my cousin? Have you seen my uncle?" And we're like, "Where was he?" "Ah, Nasiriyah or Samwa." And you're like, "Maybe not."
Yeah, and of course, because now you've gone from a position of if they've got a weapon, shoot them. If they've got camouflage on, shoot them. If they've got normal dress on, but they've got
Yeah.
a weapon, shoot them. And then all of a sudden, they've just gone, right, guys, you know that switch, kill, turn it
Yeah.
off,
Turn it
turn it
off.
off
Yes.
now, forget that, and
Yes.
get out there and become peacekeepers.
Yes.
And we covered that before about Kosovo and you got Albanians and linguists and speaking and making dummies live. So actually playing out the roles
Yeah.
as though it's real life, and then you've just gone switch it off, in you go. So how did that affect you and the guy?
That was hard for us, because we didn't have interpreters. At least we did not have official interpreters because we rolled in with camera guys from the news, and
Yeah,
so we didn't have enough interpreters to go around. Our military intel team did serve that purpose as interpreter for us, but once we got to Baghdad, they got reassigned to rejoin their higher headquarters. So we lost that capability, and here we are manning a checkpoint, interacting with civilians, and we went from all these threats, go ahead and shoot, to now you got to truly identify that it's not civilian, but you also have to give them every opportunity to identify them and even turn around. So a speeding vehicle, we used to just light that thing up with a couple hundred rounds until it stopped moving or caught on fire and stopped moving.
yeah.
But now it was like, we got to do some warning shots. We got to make sure that there's not another, and it's because there was a family in one of these cars, and it just hit us hard. We're like, that was just a dad taking his family home or getting them to safety, and he panicked and
Yeah.
just charged us. That wasn't a suicide bomber, and so we had to adjust as quickly as possible. And there wasn't a standardized set of ROE. Um, there wasn't enough time to train people formally,
Yeah.
consistently. So it was just like passing instructions down. So you have now the telephone game happening, um, and then there's the communication barrier. Like, there were people who came up to us sick, like, "Hey, can you treat our baby?" We don't know how to speak their language.
Yeah.
And then there was the time I had the 6 casualties that were brought up. They were basically scooping up all the stray ammo from the burnt out BMPs and stuff to sell
And
the black.
just before you go into that, to
Yeah.
put this into context, right? The purpose of first aid is to preserve life, and
Yes.
these 6 people were not American or British.
They were not. Yeah. In fact, my mission as a combat medic in the US Army is to conserve the fighting strength. So my
Yeah.
primary mission is to make sure soldiers get back into the battlefield. That
Yeah.
that is primary number one. And if I can't do that, then I get them to a spot where they can get surgery and go home, and they've served their country. But it's to conserve the fighting strength. That is the primary mission of a combat medic. And we're at a checkpoint in Baghdad or on the outskirts of Baghdad. And sometimes I find it on Google Maps. I'm like, that's it. That's where we were. Because there's a park nearby.
Do you like coffee? A lot of people tend to spend money on expensive coffees from outlets without even thinking about it. Well, for the price of just 2 coffees per month, you can gain access to valuable business and life resources gained from my over 37 years in business and 15 years in the military. These world-class resources are designed to help you achieve the goals, dreams, and aspirations you deserve. So visit joeteams.com now to find out more. That's JOETEAMS.com to find out more.
But anyway, I'm just kind of going through my gear, making sure it's ready, and then I hear this radio call. Hey, where's the medic? We got a civilian up here who's hurt. It looks like he stepped on something. So I go out to where the guy is. One of the sergeants said, "Hey, he looks pretty bad. Hopefully you can get him bandaged up and get him on his way." And I see him, and I'm kind of just I'm looking at his foot, and then I realize there's blood coming down from higher. So I roll it up because what they said was he stepped on something, because we don't know. Like, the guy just pointed and say, "Ow," and that was it. We have no way of knowing what he's saying because we don't speak Arabic. He didn't speak English. And I asked how he got here, if it hurts to walk. And they said, well, there was a guy on a motorcycle who dropped him off about a quarter mile away. And then other civilians picked him up and carried him here and dropped him here. And then they moved on. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I'm looking at this guy. I'm looking at his foot, and I realize, okay, he's got a wound here, and I roll it up. He's got like a round wound here, and I roll it up a little bit higher. And eventually I'm like, he's got more than one wound, or two or three. So I move his rope up, and he's got multiple holes on his shins. And on one of them, there's a bump, and I feel the bump, and it's an AK-47 round, but at the bullet part of it. And
Right, okay.
it went in under the skin. And I'm like, that didn't warp or anything. So this was like fired at low velocity, or it lost a lot of velocity by the time it went into him. And I'm like, this is a bullet wound. And as soon as I said that, they're like, well, we got to report this up. Did we, who shot him? I'm like, I don't know. Who shot you? Like, now everybody's threat meter has gone up. Like, this is a bullet wound, and these are bullet wounds. How did you get this? Who, and he said some crazy guy with an AK-47 in Iraqi was shooting at them, and they got hit. And we're like, okay, cool. And so we're reporting this up because I'm thinking this guy's going to need surgery. And my request gets denied because we didn't shoot him, and he's not an American soldier. Those were apparently our two criteria. Not an American soldier, and it wasn't an American who shot him. So we have no obligation here. Sergeant Dugan, go ahead and pass the guy along to the other side of the checkpoint. And that radio call was loud enough for everybody to hear. And the lieutenant on site looked at me. He's like, Doc, we can't just do that to these people. Like, he's thinking about overall mission, hearts and minds kind of thing. And I looked at him and I said, sir, I 100% agree. We already started looking at the guy. I already started treatment. I'm obligated to finish this. And he said, all right, well, what do you need, Doc? So I just, right now, I just need my aid bag, which I've got right here. And then if we can find an ambulance on the other side of the checkpoint, a civilian ambulance, that'd be great. And so I start treating the guy. And as soon as I'm treating this guy, just like on Forrest Gump, when Forrest Gump is bringing all his buddies and stuff to each other, out of the corner of my eye, I see this guy get plopped down next to me, and I look up, and it's an older gentleman with a beard and a robe, and he's just breathing heavily. And I look at his legs, and he's got the same kind of wounds. I'm like, what is this? And they said the motorcycle guy just dropped off another one. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, I'm almost done with this guy. I'll triage this guy real quick. And then the lieutenant came back. He's like, hey, Doc, you got 2 patients now. It looks like there might be another one on the way. What do you need? And I look up at him and I said, sir, I could use some of the soldiers I trained in first aid. If you can spare anybody to give me an extra hand, I'd greatly appreciate it. Because I was the only medic on site. Yeah. And while this is happening, a third guy gets plopped down. I'm like, what the? And then there's like 5 altogether. There's 5 guys. And I'm like, what the heck? And I'm still working on the first one. So now I have to like finish up with him real quick, because that's all he needed. And I quickly screen the other 4. One of them's going into shock. I start an IV on him. And I'm trying to get my combat lifesaver guys, the guys I trained on first aid, to render aid. But, it was a quick class. I didn't expect them to remember any of it. I was just hoping they would. So they kind of panicked a little bit. And they're like, Doc, we don't know how to do it. We don't remember that. I'm like, okay, do you remember what the bandages look like? So they're like, yeah. All right, just hand me stuff and open it. So we would do that. Treated the 5 guys. They flagged down an ambulance. We put all 5 patients onto that one ambulance, and they went to one of 3 hospitals out of 80 that were still operating in Baghdad. Somewhere in this, there was an Italian news crew on its way up to Tikrit to watch and report on the Marines moving up to that way, as well as the 4th Infantry Division to secure the town of Tikrit, and also I forgot where Saddam Hussein was from, but his hometown as well. So the Ramadi, the Sunni Triangle, like they were going up there to report on that. But they saw what I was doing and immediately whipped out their cameras, started taking photos. They realized I was out of hands. So the reporter, who was really just going to write the story, he starts helping me, and he's like, I took first aid and they taught us stuff before we came into the country. How can I help? I'm like, well, can you wrap this up, but don't tie it too tightly. And so he was like prepping bandages on people for me. So they got pictures of him helping me treat patients. And then I realized, hey, how do you guys know what's going on around here? Like, well, we got this guy from, I think it was like Saudi Arabia or Kuwait, who was interpreting for them. I was like, help us communicate with these guys. And so we commandeered their interpreter. And so like we were scrappy. We were working with what we had. And so we were leveraging extra hands from a reporter. We were getting press in Italy for it. These guys were British, by the way. So that was the really cool thing. So British reporters working for an Italian paper, partnering with somebody from Kuwait or Saudi Arabia to interpret for them, helping a bunch of Americans.
Fantastic.
The most global thing I'd ever experienced in my life, probably. And so we got the 5 guys fixed up onto an ambulance, off they go. And then after that was done, I'm regrouping, resupplying, and they tell me a 6th guy was brought in, and he's worse than the other 5 combined. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And turns out he was the youngest as well, and probably the closest survivor to what had happened. And I wound up treating him and commandeered another ambulance and got him on his way. And the reporters went and followed the ambulance basically to get the rest of their story. And what we found out the next day when the reporters came back was that these guys were picking up ammo, and in amongst the ammo were these lug nut looking things with ribbons on them. And they started playing hot potato with one of them. You know, it's where you toss it to one guy and he's like, oh, and you toss it to somebody else as quickly as possible. They don't know what they're playing with. They just think it's a piece of metal with a ribbon on it. And they know it's not a bullet. So let's mess around.
And actually, everything with ribbons on isn't necessarily a toy, is it?
No, it is not. So you've probably heard of cluster bombs, guys. And
yeah, definitely nasty bits of work.
Oh yeah. And I learned the hard way that those things, the bomblets in like an air munition cluster bomb, is about the size of a soda can, a 12-ounce soda can, and it has a little parachute on the back. It doesn't look like a soda can though. It's got the same shape, way different. Now the artillery has the same thing. It's called a dual purpose conventional munition, and it shoots out these little bomblets, and they look like lug nuts with a ribbon on the back. And so what happens is the thing explodes, all these bomblets come out, and the ribbons come out and activate like a parachute. They activate the bomblet, and then those hit armored vehicles, ammo dumps, people, and just blows everything up. But they don't all blow up. When we found that out when we got to Baghdad.
Yeah, because I'm actually OD. And like 25% of them do not go off, and sometimes maybe more. So for every 100 that are dropped, 25 are still alive and kicking.
Yes. And in the U.S. Army, we don't fire just one round.
No.
If it's the enemy we're shooting at, it's what they call a battery or a battalion 18. And that means every gun in the battery, which is 6 cannons, or battalion, which is 18 cannons, is firing 18 rounds apiece.
Yeah.
One round is meant to wipe out everything on a football field. So 1 acre of land, and you imagine 18 rounds landing on that one piece of land, and then we do a section. So really an 18 by 18 grid or a 6 by 6 grid, we're wiping out everything. And only, and when 25% of those bomblets are still around, it's a lot of bomblets. And so these guys had found one. They're playing hot potato with it. One guy decides he's not going to catch it. He steps out of the way. The ribbon comes out, activates it accidentally. It lands right on the ammo cart that they've been collecting bullets from, cooks off the ammo, immediately kills, I think, 3 or 4 people in that group. And the kid I treated last, number 6, he was probably about 16 years old, 15 years old,
Wow.
and he got the worst of the survivors. He did get the worst of it, and then everybody else is kind of spread out around that cart.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
that was
well done for taking charge.
yeah.
That was cool. And then, I mean, I know you did many other incidents. The one I want to touch on though is shows why you should stay focused on your job, whether you're in the military or not. Because there was one guy that didn't stay focused because it was like a magpie going for the shiny thing. Just tell us
Yes.
about that, will you?
So I also remember this is the day my daughter was born, because I mean that morning I got a letter. My daughter was going to be born by C-section, and so to celebrate, my platoon sergeant and platoon leader say, "Hey Doc, we're going to do a supply run into downtown. Why don't you come with us? You know, get out of the compound for a change." I'm like, "Great, let's do this." So we get in the vehicles. We're going downtown. We're going to pick up like things like pizza and hamburgers from the local vendors. We're not even going to question where they got the meat from. We're just like, if it's cooked, that's all we care about. And if it tastes better than an MRE, we're in. So we did our supply run. We're heading back to base, but we have to stop at a traffic intersection. And there's another unit across the way from us. And I don't remember what brigade. They weren't even our brigade. They were a different brigade, but within 3rd Infantry Division. And you hear an explosion go off. And as soon as that happens, I'm thinking, oh man, there are all these tall buildings around us. We're definitely in a Black Hawk Down scenario here. We're at the bottom of the zone. And I just kind of pucker up. I'm like, oh dear. And there was like a little girl that like had me take a picture of her. And I still have it on a photo album somewhere. But after that explosion, I look, she's gone. I'm like, all right, good. Hopefully she's safe. She's not in the line of fire. And I'm looking around like, oh boy, this is bad. And I'm like, are we going to get out of here? And they're like, we don't even know which way to go right now. There's all this traffic blocked. Turns out what happened was there was a military policeman. He is pulling guard duty outside a restaurant while the officers are inside eating at this restaurant. And he decides he's going to talk to the locals. And one of them happens to be a woman or a girl. And so, yeah, this is an American kid. He's probably about 21 years old, 20, somewhere in there. And he is just getting to know a girl's name. She speaks some English. He's making her laugh. He's doing stupid stuff, handing her, little treats and so on, water bottles, whatever, anything to keep her there so he can keep looking at her. What he's supposed to be doing is looking at everything else but her. And so while this is going on, apparently somebody ran right up behind his vehicle, dropped a homemade grenade underneath it. It exploded. It wounded him. And everybody scattered except him, of course. So that was my patient. It was an MP from another unit. And once we found out somebody was hurt, my platoon sergeant, he was like, hey Doc, grab your bag, somebody got hurt. And so I grabbed my gear and we sprint over there. It was probably a good 200 yards, 200 meters, something like that. And I get on top of the Humvee because by the time I get there, they've pulled this guy out of the turret of the Humvee on top of the Humvee's hood where the engine compartment is. And somebody in a uniform is treating him, but he's not a medic. And then there's a civilian, an Iraqi civilian in a suit, kind of giving orders to this guy, like, oh, hey, check for this, check for that. And I recognize this guy is giving medical input. And I'm like, chances are the guy's a doctor. I'm like, hey, how come the civilian is giving you guys input on what to do to this guy? What happened here? And they said, well, he's Dr. So-and-so. He lives right up the street, but he was out for a walk, heard what happened and thought he could help us.
Right.
And,
Good.
And the guy spoke English. I was like, oh, wow, cool. So what have you guys done so far? I'm a medic. I'm with blah, blah, blah unit. I introduce myself. I say hi to the soldier. He does not acknowledge me. He's too busy, not happy. But he's talking. He's not screaming in pain, but he's also not happy and he is in pain. And so the doctor fills me in on what they've done. The soldier who's doing the actual work, he's doing that too. And then I immediately just start an assessment and I start treating the wounds I do see. We go ahead and assume that he's got a broken calf or two. And so we tighten those down. And the whole time though, I'm thinking, we're still on top of a Humvee in probably an ambush zone, like a kill zone here. And the more soldiers who show up, the worse this is going to be because there was a crowd of US soldiers now starting to form because they're curious about what happened to this guy. Is he okay? Is he going to live?
Yeah, because right, they want to attract you into the killing zone so they get more of you, right? So
exactly. And so I'm looking at these guys like, And these guys are military policemen. And I'm thinking in my head, like, why is the medic concerned about security here? And so I kind of look up and I'm like, hey, should we pull security? And I think we've got this guy packaged enough. And I'm doing like some assessments to make sure that his back isn't broken. And then I'm like, all right, cool. We could either put him on a stretcher and put him inside the back of a Humvee or a truck. What do you guys have to work with? And they said, we only have these 4-seaters. I'm like, all right, what about the cargo space in that one? And they said, well, it's got stuff in it. I'm like, well, can you put the stuff in the other car, the other vehicle? And they're like, yeah, who are you? I'm like, I'm the medic. You got to evacuate this guy.
Yeah, I'm a medic with some common sense.
Yeah. And I'm like, best thing we could do is listen to what the doctor's saying. We also got to assume there's a spinal injury here. So the more we have this guy moving his head and talking and all that, more likely he's going to not be walking when he gets home. And we want him walking and running and, back in the fight. Like, oh yeah, good idea, doc. So in the end, they couldn't find a stretcher, and we're just like, all right, well, we're still up here, and this guy's undoing all the bandages anyway. Can you pick him up and carry him as one unit and drop him in the back of that Humvee and just get out of here? And they're like, we could do that. And they do. But all that because the guy was picking up on a girl in the local area and not paying attention to his actual job, which allowed that complacency so quickly. We had just stopped combat like 3 days or 4 days ago. And this guy is thinking things are cool enough he can start picking up on the local women.
And I remember talking with a good friend of mine, Brigadier, who's actually been on the podcast.
Oh, wow.
And he was giving a talk to civilians. And he said, look, guys, the difference between the military and business, when you get things wrong in the business, you might lose money. Yeah. When you get things wrong in the military, you get more body bags. And then there was a hush in the room because that puts it into perspective. So like this guy lost focus for a minute, saw the shiny thing, the attractive female. And then, because it was probably all set up anyway. Yeah. And that's when lives can be lost, sadly. Yeah. Fortunately, you saved the guy's bacon, which is good. And I remember how important the first aid was for me as well, because after my fall of a few 100 feet, which we know about and we've discussed that, then I was immobilized because I did break my neck, but because I was immobilized and the correct procedure was done, it meant that my spinal cord wasn't severed, it was damaged, which means that I can move.
Yes. Yeah. You were the guy that your training was so easy that you decided to just fall off a mountain and
yeah. Do not train in gale force winds on the edge of a mountain because it's not good when you're carrying a backpack. Bergen. Yeah. So thank you for that, and thank you for your service and saving lives. Right. So then you come back and you see your medical career in the military. What was it that triggered don't want to do this anymore?
Yes. As far as the Army service, the things that triggered that were a couple of things. One was as we were coming home, it just sort of hit me as I'm rereading letters from home. My wife's aunts and uncles are writing to me to tell me, hey, don't worry about your family. We're taking good care of them. Hey, don't worry about your son. He's doing this, this, and this. He's having a great time. We're taking good care of him. And you read that so many times, you realize, wait, I'm supposed to be the guy who takes care of him. And my daughter, who I haven't met yet, I need to be home more often. And I just started thinking about, if I stay in the Army, I am going to get reassigned to units that are redeploying back to Afghanistan or Iraq. And if I'm lucky, I get to come home. If not, I come home a different way. But the reality is, even if I get to come home, I'm going to miss probably half of their childhood for as long as this war is going to go on. The global war on terror, that is. And then on top of that, my wife and I have only been married for 2 years. And if this keeps up, half the time that we would spend as a married couple is going to be me either in training areas, actually more than half, in a training area to prepare to deploy for a year. And it's like, I've already seen that the communication is spotty. Like, I don't get to talk to my wife every single day, twice a day. It's like the guys in the mountains, or for me, it was an open desert. I didn't talk to my wife from just days before the invasion for about 3 or 4 minutes during a sandstorm. I didn't talk to her from then. I think so it was like March 13th, March 14th.
Right.
And I didn't talk to her again until mid-April. So over a month and a half.
And that's not a physical cuddle. That's like talking.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Phone call, even letters. Like we didn't get mail until a week after operations ceased for combat. So mid-April is about actually, yeah, last weeks of April is when I started getting mail from home. And more specifically, the letter that told me my daughter was going to be born was when we started getting mail again.
Because interestingly enough, civilians might not recognize, but you don't have Postman Pat or a mail van coming round with your mail. It's not like that at all. And and I always remember when the blueies come in, the blue mail letters, and on the mail roll, and you see all your mates getting the letters and you don't get one, and you think, shucks.
Yes.
Yeah. Nobody loves me. Yeah.
You know, the worst possible product placement in a war movie would be something like The Outpost, and an Amazon truck pulls up and drops off packages and then drives away, because that would not happen in a combat zone. There's not enough.
No. And if it did, I bet you that delivery driver would be getting some pay.
That whole truck would get inspected.
Yeah, he'd want a bonus for that, wouldn't he?
Yes.
So right, you recognized, and you know, if you'd have stayed in, right, you'd have been through. You would have done most of your military career in a conflict zone, because I mean it just carried on, and lots of guys have experienced that. So fortunately, you didn't. So what did you do when you got out? How difficult was it to transition?
Finding a job. The fortunate thing was the Army had a decent transition program at that time. It's even better now because they realized they weren't doing a lot to transition soldiers out of service still, even after all these, hundreds of years. And so my boss, really nice guy, very great guy. And he knew I was not going to reenlist. So he said, well, start thinking about transition. And I want you to show up in the morning, report for work. And then your job for the day is go job hunt, go use that resource over there, go use that resource over there. When are you taking terminal leave? So at the end of our enlistment, if you have any leave saved up, you can take that from whatever days you got left. And I had something like 30 days saved up. So the last 30 days of service, I was in Corpus Christi, Texas, preparing for my new job. And so that's great. So I got, because I did all my paperwork beforehand. So yeah, before I left Fort Benning, I got to, mow my yard, clean the house up, make sure I could turn it back into the government, and make sure that we had arrangements for our household items to go back to Texas. And I'm doing job searches at the same time. And I'm thinking, well, I'm a medic. I'm going to find a job in the medical field as an ambulance driver, paramedic, CNA, whatever. And it turns out, even though I have some good skills as a medic, it's like I could do things that a paramedic could do. I could push drugs, I could do CPR, I could use a defibrillator. I could read at that time. I could read what do you call it? The
cardiogram.
The cardiogram. Yeah. Thank you so much. So I could identify tachycardia and those kinds of things. I could do chest tubes. There's a movie out there called Three Kings, and there's something that one of the characters does where he plunges a needle into the guy's chest for air pressure. I know how to do that, and I can do that. I know how to put a chest tube in. I assisted with that. I could do sutures, so all kinds of things. I could even calculate dosages appropriately in the event we don't have a pharmacist around, and use a pharmacopoeia to kind of select what could be prescribed and not hurt somebody, but to a certain degree within my license. So I know how to do all those things. All that to say, the only certification the Army gave me was an EMT basic. And a couple of other skill identifiers like trauma assessment type of stuff. So the best I could do with that certification was to drive an ambulance, and that's it. So I wouldn't even be allowed to help with a patient in the back. I could drive the ambulance, and then worst case scenario, provide some basic first aid to the people on my team. That's all I was allowed to do in the civilian world.
And I mean, that's shocking when you think that you've been in the thick of it. At the sharp end, saving people's lives.
Yes. And so that job, at the time, minimum wage was $7.25 an hour. And I think this job was going to pay $8.50 an hour. And I did the math. to support my family, I was going to need to earn at least $15 an hour. At that time, this is 1990. No, it's 2003.
Yeah.
So bare minimum, I need to earn $15 an hour to, cover our family's expenses. We were, very, very small family, very young family, not a lot of expenses yet. And so I was like, oh, well, I can't do that job then because that's not going to pay well. And so I just started looking at transferable skills. So I think that's the key thing. There was the transferable skills. Somebody who's an infantryman, you can't go in the civilian world and find a lot of companies that are looking for people who can shoot a machine gun.
Yeah.
Not a lot of room for that. But transferable skills would be things like project management. Soldiers are taught to think with the end in mind and plan backwards from there. Communication, team leadership. And so I started tapping into those skills as a sergeant, and then look at jobs around that. And my mother-in-law found a posting for a training coordinator who led orientation for new employees at a health system, and it paid well over $20 an hour to get started. I was like, hey, that's more than the minimum we're looking for. We can work with that. And what are the requirements? They're like, you have to have a bachelor's degree. I'm like, I got one of those. You have to have experience training others. I'm like, I've got that in the Army. I train more people than I expected to. And so I know how to conduct a class. And then the third thing is you got to love to talk. And if you've been listening to this unedited, then I love to talk. So I applied, and because the war had just happened and America was very patriotic at the time, and I fit all the criteria they were looking for, I was pretty much a shoo-in for the job, got hired. That was my first job out of the Army, was education coordinator for Christus Spawn Health System. And I had that job for about, 3 years.
Yeah.
About 2.5, 3 years. And my current boss at that time, he had left, new one came in. She's known in that organization as the crazy lady to this day. So we parted ways, and then I took on various roles after that. But by about 2010, my wife and I had a conversation, and we realized training other people is something I'm very passionate about. And that's kind of my gifted area, is taking complex ideas and practices and breaking it down in a way that people can pick up on the skill and pick up on the concepts and apply them successfully in the real world. And that was my thing. I was like, all right, cool. Let's get back into that. So that's what I've been doing since 2010.
And on that journey, that goes right back to that drill instructor who says, look, what you're doing, you need to get respect from your guys. Don't do it on them from a great height. Actually, empower them.
Yes.
So that's what your whole journey has been about, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you recognize that you love training people, and I share your passion for that, because if you can get someone to do something they would not have done had you not been there, I mean, that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't get better than that. So 2010, you're chatting with your wife and you think, right, okay, what we're going to do. So what happens then?
I start transitioning out of my role as a real estate sales agent and a self-employed kind of role. So that was easy to do. I didn't have to resign. It was just like, oh, I'm going to sell as many houses as I can while I go get a job.
So you just had a conversation with yourself. Look, it's not working out. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, you've got to go.
Yeah, your wife sells better than you do, and she doesn't even have a real estate license, Jerry. There's a lesson to be had here. And so I got picked up as a community educator for a battered women's shelter. And so my job was to go into the community, talk to churches, schools, Rotary clubs, whoever would listen to us, government agencies, about the signs of domestic violence, how to counter that, how to get help, how to help somebody in that situation and not put them in danger. That was my role. And the reason why they hired me was they were looking specifically for a male role model to go out into the community and say these things and not just say it, but also live by it and be believable. And I was already kind of raising my family to break a lot of norms, not for the sake of breaking them, but just for the sake of being the best person we could be. And I was involved heavily in my church. My wife and I were involved heavily with a marriage ministry called Family Life. And we kind of fit the bill for what they were looking for in that respect, and made a lot of impact there for about, I think I was there for about 4 years. And during that time, I picked up my master's degree. in educational technology. Eventually I realized, nonprofit agencies don't pay a whole lot when you're about to raise teenagers and
Yeah.
send them off to college. And we probably need to think about retirement, and we have nothing because we get paid very little right now. And so because of the master's degree, I got picked up by the original stomping ground, Christus Health, and became an education consultant with them and doubled my income right then and there. And that exposed me a lot more opportunity to develop leaders in the healthcare space. So that was a lot of fun, and I'm learning the whole time. And I'm working with a team of people where the leaders are exercising the very things that we're teaching other leaders to do. And so our money was where our mouth was, and they appreciated my military background because that servant leadership style really worked well in the Catholic healthcare environment and tied in with the mission and core values of the organization like crazy. And then I move on to another organization where I got so while I was doing this, I got promoted to manager and then up to director. But the director role was with another organization, and I was there for so I was at Christus for about 5 years, and then I moved on to the Methodist Health System for about 3 years. And at the end of 2022, felt burned out, felt I needed a break. My wife and I talked about it and said, it's time to take a break. Go ahead and quit that job. We'll make this work. And then I started BTR Impact, and it just focuses on leadership development like crazy. Got a 90-day program that helps leaders adopt a leadership framework I call TENT, T-E-N-T, that if you put these 4 stakes in the ground first of trust building, empowering, navigating for success, and thriving together, the environment you create pops up very easily. And that environment you want to create is the kind of environment where people thrive. It adapts to their needs, and it kind of meets them where they are to help them develop to be better employees and people than they were when they started working for you. And so I teach that to organizations, to their leaders, leadership teams, to apply. And that 90-day program is very impactful. It takes them through a 3-phase journey of assessing what's going on in their team, addressing the issues that come up, and then advancing into the next 90 days. So what's going to be sustained, and then what do we do for the next 90 days? And the people who've done these practices have seen not just improvement in terms of retaining their employees, they start to see things like 21% more profitability. They start to see a reduction in absenteeism. So if you don't know, absenteeism in the United States costs businesses about $1,686 per person per year. So that's kind of your baseline. But if you're in the top quartile of companies when it comes to employee engagement, like you have the most engaged employees, the happiest employees, and they're performing the best, you're going to see a 41% reduction in that estimate. And so you're going to recoup that. Companies with high engagement of employees, high accountability, and so on, they also have a lot less voluntary turnover in their companies. And it could cost you about 3 times the annual salary of somebody to replace that person. And so if you think about like the average salary in the United States is about $59,000, it could cost up to $177,000 by the time you replace that person in terms of recruitment costs, onboarding costs, lost productivity, overtime, all that adds up, training costs even. And if you want to save those dollars, it's cheaper to just encourage your people to stay. And you could do that with the TENT framework. So that's what I've been.
Yeah, and keeping a happy workforce is a lot better. I mean, it's like banks, when I see the amount of money they spend on recruiting new customers, if they just kept their existing customers happy, it'd save a fortune. And that's the same with employers. If they're going to run, if they're going to be a Jerry Dugan when he was a sergeant in his group who was being a dictatorial, I won't say the full title, but you weren't being a nice guy, right? You were getting in fights 2-3 fights a day. And although you can't have physical contact to the same extent you do in the military, the replacement for physical contact is your team won't work for you.
Yes, exactly. And I don't know what it is like in other countries, but in the US, they say 85% of the people who leave their jobs because of their manager or some kind of dynamic with the manager that can't be resolved. So it's those interpersonal skills. And there's a guy here. He's actually from the UK, Marcus Buckingham, and he worked with the Gallup, the company Gallup,
Right.
for a number of years. And he's the author of a book called Nine Lies About Work. And one of the things that he points out, one of the lies that he talks about, is why people leave the job. And people say on the exit interview, it was for more pay or a better opportunity. But when you dug deeper, what you found out was it was my manager. That's why I left the job. And on the flip side of the coin, the thing that's most influential to keep somebody on board and keep them heavily engaged and successful, or at least inspired to be successful, is the manager. So the manager is the most pivotal part of an organization. In the U.S. Army, we say the non-commissioned officer, the sergeants, are the backbone of the Army.
Yeah.
They're the reason why people succeed or fail. They're the reasons why missions get done or not. They're also the reasons why somebody chooses to re-enlist or not. And
same as, because in my time in the military, I know the responsibilities I had, and to keep the guys happy. And if you've got a happy bunch of guys, they're going to watch you back.
Yeah.
And you need them to watch you back, because if you don't treat them right, the consequences are dire. So the other thing you do is, you've got the podcast, which you were so gracious to let me come on as your guest. Beyond the Rut is something really great, because that talks about how people can get stuck and actually get over stuff, because that's what this Veterans to Success is about. So we're on a similar mission. So people can tune into that, because they'll get to hear you regular. So with the BTR, right, how can the BTR impact? How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. My website, beyondtherut.com, has all my episodes there, as well as a link to BTR Impact, which is my leadership development business. From beyondtherut.com, you can link out to my book. So it's all there on the homepage. There's the podcast, the book, and then the goal setting tool. There's a free goal setting tool there, because a lot of people don't know what success looks like for themselves. So if you feel stuck in life where you're kind of repeating these non-productive behaviors every single day, and you're not looking forward to the next one, or you're not even looking forward to the day you have ahead of you because your job sucks, or family life is rough, whatever it is, chances are you're pursuing somebody else's definition of success. And in the US, we're told the American dream is you buy a car or two, you have a house with a fence, you have a dog, you have a family, you have credit cards, and it's okay to live in debt. And to pay for all of it, you got to move up the ranks in a company or own a company. And, you see people give up their dreams of being a writer or being a banker. I don't know. Do people dream of being a banker? Probably. I know a guy who left being a banker to be a park ranger.
Right.
And he made that work. Now he's doing what I do in podcasting, but way better. But all that to say, when we take the reins and say, this is what success looks like for me in my faith journey, in my family life, and my fitness levels, both emotional as well as physical, this is what success looks like for me financially.
Yeah.
In the US, a lot of us just arbitrarily say we got to have $1 million, or our net worth is so important. And so you'll see people measure themselves off of net worth. And it's like, well, for me, in the 5 F's, the fifth F is becoming the future person you want to be. So future possibility. So faith, family, fitness, finances, and future possibility. We put finances fourth to remind ourselves, and I say we still, because there were 3 of us who started Beyond the Rut, the podcast, but finances is fourth to remind us that it's not the most important thing in life, that our faith journey is, our family life, and our fitness are more important, that the finances are the vehicle to help all those things happen or come to fruition so you can give more. So you may not be religious, but you probably want to be more generous in society. Money does allow you to be generous on a larger scale. You can be generous and be broke too. But when you got money, you can send kids to college. You can build houses for people. You can build homes for the homeless that keep them off the streets. You can fund programs that keep people healthy and fed. All kinds of things you could do when you scale up your finances. So that's the faith part. Family, money kind of supports that. You can cover them with life insurance. You can cover them with medical insurance. You can go on vacations together. And then fitness, you can take care of yourself much more easily when you have things to cover it, like medical insurance and premiums and so on. So it's that reminder of like, that's the vehicle, it's not the driver. And it's great to earn more, but not at the expense of anything else like your health or your family life.
That's
So,
right. And that's interesting because when I run the mastermind program, which is 13 modules just over a year, one of the last things I talk about is wealth management and what that is, whether it's money or health, because you've got to get into a position where you've created the lifestyle to make the money. So I leave that until the end, because that's not as important as getting the rest of the stuff. So I totally concur with what you're saying.
Yeah.
So we've talked about transferable skills. How transferable do you think the stuff that you learned in the military is in civil life?
I think very much so. The leadership stuff in the U.S. Army, we're really big on servant leadership. The movies make it sound like it's all about yelling at each other and, rank has its privileges. But the reality is, if you want to be successful as a leader, you take full responsibility of the mission, but you share the power with your team to get the mission done. You have accountability for yourself, as well as expect a high standard of people. Lots of communication. A well-run mission is preceded by lots of communication on what the commander's intent is. So what, this plan's going to hit the fan the moment we hit contact with the enemy.
Yeah.
This is what we're really trying to do. We're trying to stop the bad guys from building this. And if we do that on the ground, maybe not by the way we planned it initially, but we still prevent that thing from happening, that's the point. If we lose half the guys and we still take that thing out, that was the point. We'd rather not lose half the guys. So that communication, what is the commander's intent? Above all else, this is what a successful mission looks like. All right, now let's talk about the plan. Boom, 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 boom. You're in charge of this. You're in charge of that. Report back to me when these things are ready, before we go on mission. It's like the project planning piece, very transferable. So communication, transferable. Establishing a vision, transferable. Living by a leadership credo, transferable. Project management, transferable. Having discipline developed, that is transferable, because I was surprised when I transitioned out of the Army that there's no such thing as showing up on time, or at least early. In the Army, you showed up 15 minutes prior to everything. And if you're 14 minutes early, you were actually 1 minute late. And then in civilian life, on time meant on time. So if it starts at 8 o'clock, people walked in right at 8 o'clock. So you had to like build time to process people into the training session. Whereas in the Army, we did that during the 15 minutes you showed up prior. So right at 8 o'clock, boom, we started.
And I remember when I was developing my team, they come in on the time, and then they'd put the computer on, which would take a few minutes to boot up. Then they'd make a cup of tea. I said, guys, you want to do that? That's great. You get in, you calculate how long that takes before you're ready, because I want you ready on the dot, not sitting down on the dot. So they worked out it was 10, 15 minutes. I said, right, so that's it. Or you leave 15 minutes later. I'm easy, whichever way you want.
My first day of the job, I was in orientation as a student, and I remember seeing people walk in 7, 8, 15 minutes late, and they would just be allowed to sit down and continue on. I'm like, oh my gosh. In the Army, they would be escorted out of the room. You hear lots of yelling and exercising. Then they get to come in, but now they're in trouble because they're even later than and or they got smoked later on. It's just like, there was a consequence though.
And so we've got that. What I've got is that how you deal with failure, you just get on with it, don't you? And look at what the lessons can be learned. So just before we go, right, because it's been a great conversation and I've really enjoyed it. What's the one tip, the Columbo question, what's the one tip you would give to a guy, male, female, who was leaving the military and not sure what to do, how to transferable the skills are, or they've left the military and maybe they've hit on not so good times, or they've left the military and they're doing really well, or in fact, someone who's never been in the military but finds the military is interesting. What's the one tip you would give them to be successful?
Yeah. One tip with two different solutions to it. So, I think Wayne Gretzky, and hockey player, said that you miss 100% of the shots you never take. I heard a real estate broker say once, a lot of people aim for nothing and hit it with amazing accuracy. And I had said earlier in this conversation that a lot of us feel stuck in life because we're following somebody else's definition of what success should be, as opposed to what our own definition of success is for ourselves, our lives. And so my one tip is take the time to truly identify for yourself what success means for you. And be okay with moving the goalposts and understanding over time, like, I had this goal, but I don't do anything for it. Is it really my goal or is it somebody else's? And be ready to take that off. So the one tip is design and define your version of success. And a great framework I follow is the 5 Fs. And there's a free tool I've got. You can get it at beyondtherut.com/goals. And it's I think a 7-page workbook, and it'll walk you through what is it you want out of life. When your life is done, what do you want to be known for? What kind of impact do you want to have had? And what does success look like in these areas of your life? And then from there, what do you need to do to get there? And what do you need to stop doing that's keeping you from getting there? Really cool workbook. If you're thinking about career or business, there's a book by, I believe his name's Dan Miller, called 48 Days to the Work You Love.
Yeah, I know
that book alone really changed my perspective of what I do for money. So it helped me identify my skills. So those transferable skills we talked about from the military, other skills that I picked up along the way, my passions, what kind of work is out there. And that Venn diagram really helped me identify these are the types of jobs I'd really love to do. So things like podcasting, not really a job, more of a passion. But it allows me to create and then teaching and doing facilitation of training, coaching. Those are the things I love to do. And I have skill sets around that. And my passions also overlap with that. And so that's how I wound up where I am. That kind of work on the inside helped me get there. And then I start identifying 5-year goals, and I break it down to 1-year goals and then quarterly goals. And then that's in the free goals packet called Measure It to Make It. And then, what do I do every day to build momentum to get there? And so that's my one tip. Define success on your terms. And then the 2 tools are my free tool at beyondtherut.com/goals, and then 48 Days to the Work You Love. Mess with both of those, and then invest 1 day a year at least, where you go through that exercise all over again. What worked well, what didn't, how much of this life vision of yours is still yours? What do you prune from it because you realize that wasn't your thing anyway? And you'll find yourself looking back 10 years from now thinking, wow, I've done a lot with my life I didn't expect to, and I've gotten a whole lot more experiences than I expected, and there's still more I can do. And then you just redefine success again and go forward. So have at it, guys.
Thank you very much, Jerry Dugan. And I've really enjoyed our chat, and I think we actually achieved what we set out to, because I said, as we go along, we're going to do a great reveal on your life, which we certainly have, and I bet you, the listener, was not expecting that. So, Jerry, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Joe. Thanks for having me on here, and I look forward to staying in touch in the years to come.
Definitely. We'll be doing more stuff together in the future, yes. I'm sure. So, listen, thank you for listening, and until we meet again, have a brilliant day.
JoeTeams.com is a resource I have created to fulfill my mission to help 1 million veterans and business entrepreneurs like you achieve the goals, dreams, and aspirations they deserve. JoeTeams.com is jam-packed full of valuable resources specifically designed to help you on your journey to success. Visit JoeTeams.com now to find out how you can join and start your journey to success immediately. That's JoeTeams.com, JoeTeams, JoeTeams.com. And until we meet again, have a brilliant day.